Welcome to another edition of Overcome Out Loud with Charlie Smith. This is where I get to sit down with real people that have overcome real obstacles and challenges in their life to give other people hope that there's a way out. Today, my guest is a really inspiring woman. Trisha Kendall is with me today. Trisha has gone from literally having a loaded syringe with an overdose in it ready to inject into her body to end her life before a phone call came from her sister. Today, she is an inspiring, inspirational speaker. She is an executive in the healthcare industry. She spends most of her time inspiring other women to identify the success that they can have in their own life through sharing openly her challenges. Trisha, welcome to Overcome Out Loud, and thank you for being here.
It's just awesome to see you. I love seeing you. And I am still teary-eyed from the song you played before you hit record.
So I start these episodes usually with some upbeat music, but Trish and I shared a song, and we'll get into that a little bit in her story because it was so poignant. And having gone through the loss of my sister through an intentional overdose myself, our stories are so parallel. And, you know, as a way of introduction, it may seem like Trish and I have known each other all our lives. We actually just met a month ago through a mutual friend, Craig Maloney, who I've known for over 30 years. And he put us together. And I was talking to Craig this morning. I said, I literally feel like I have met my soul sister. I mean, you know, the passion that you have and the past that we've walked, you know, are so similar. And to see what you're doing today, it's just, I just couldn't wait to see you.
It's awesome. And thank you, Craig.
Yeah, thank you, Craig. So I like to, you know, I think every hero has an origin story, and I think for most to know kind of where we got to, you know, starts with where we've been, and I want to start a little bit with your upbringing because it shapes so much of what we believe about ourselves and ultimately how we behave and the narrative that we get, and I want to get into that a little bit with you because it's a powerful part of your story that you share so openly. And I want to say how grateful I am, especially for the women that have come on Overcome Out Loud. I think women today, you know, are under a tremendous amount of pressure. I think, you know, with identities issues and the pressure put on them by social media and the advertising world, and just in general, that to hear strong, powerful women who have walked the path that you've walked is amazing. And so thank you for giving the gift of yourself to others. And so let's get started, and tell me a little bit about where life began for you, Trisha.
Okay, and this is where it just all opens up.
That's right.
Completely. It really is because my story does begin with where did I begin? I grew up really spread around. I was born in Arizona, quickly moved to Washington State. I'm the youngest of three kids. I have a brother who is 15 months older than me and a sister who is 5 years older than me. And we grew up pretty poor on the poverty level. Sometimes food stamps, sometimes we had enough, you know, for bikes for Christmas, and sometimes we had nothing. So that just adds context to it. And we moved around a ton growing up. So I never went to the same school for longer than a year. In fact, my sister and I, a while ago, mapped out how many schools, at least that I went to before I graduated high school, and it was 13. I went to 13 different schools. And the reason for that is at an incredibly young age, my father, who lived with us, my biological father, sexually abused my sister and me. And she did not know that it was happening to me. It's very stereotypical. The older sister doesn't know that it's happening to the younger sister. And, you know, we were very completely quiet about it and didn't tell anyone. And what my dad did is moved us around and moved the family from town to town, school to school, you know, basically so, you know, nobody could really find out what was going on. Because this is something that was very much a part of, it wasn't a one-time thing. So it started when I was very young and lasted for 7 years. So from the time I was 6 until I was 13. And so that just adds color, if you will, around how I grew up, because I never had the opportunity to really connect with people outside of my family, outside of my sister, really. In a way that, you know, you and I were just talking about this connecting, and Craig connecting you and I, and how important that is.
Yeah. So there's two really important parts of that. And I think for those of us who grew up in violent, abusive families, there's a little bit of a pattern that exists, which is that don't talk, don't feel, don't tell. And so even though it's funny to hear you say you couldn't establish real community outside of your family, but even inside of your inside your own family, the sense of real trust and vulnerability that existed was limited because you had this abuse
Mhm.
going on that even you and your sister couldn't talk, tell, or feel about. So even inside of the family, how you could feel was limited, let alone what you could establish in terms of your own identity with any kind of friends. Is that accurate?
No, that's right on completely, and very obviously very confusing,
Sure.
very confusing. And I learned at a very young age how to compartmentalize things and justify things and look at the good things versus the bad things, and really, kind of create my own reality around what was happening.
And I don't want to miss the opportunity to talk, because although some people talk about post-traumatic stress, and post-traumatic
Mhm.
stress can be very situational, but what you and I, having gone from the age of 5 for me to the age of 20, and for you, from the age of 6 to the age of 13, I mean, this is complex trauma. So it happens repeatedly. It happens unexpectedly. We don't know how to predict when it's going to happen. And so we really do hold on to these trauma lenses, because that trauma is so prevalent in our lives, and that's, I'm sure, what you experienced. And for everybody that hasn't heard your story, I don't want to miss the opportunity to talk about where you first experienced the betrayal of your father and his responsibility as a parent, because it's part of your story. It's part of Lily's story. It's part of how you've overcome so much. Is what went from this childhood experience of getting attached to and finally experiencing this pony, this pet, this animal,
Yeah.
as you had such a love for animals, turned from something that you were so looking forward to the start of the betrayal by your dad. Can you share a little bit about that with us?
Yeah, I mean, it's what you just said, and horrifying to actually think about. Again, going back to the compartmentalization, I very much compartmentalize, and sometimes don't even realize that girl is me.
Yeah.
So that's a whole, right, that. So that's a whole nother path. To answer your question, well, so I said the bad about my dad. Obviously, that's horrific. The other part of my dad is he was incredibly giving and loving, and one of the things that he loved was horses, and he introduced horses to me and my sister and my brother at a very young age, and it was a part of our life. And most of the time we had two horses that we would kind of my dad would take from place to place, and they would be, at a stable on the outskirts of town, basically. And, I was just a little girl. And when I was 6, we would go and visit the stable, and there was a pony there, and the pony, as you can imagine, any little girl, gets incredibly attached to a pony or the unicorn. And I got to take care of this pony and brush her and love her and all of those things. And my dad is the one that would take me there to go and see this pony where his horse was staying. And, in that story is a little girl who looked forward to Saturday and Sunday mornings to get into the pickup truck with her dad and go to the stable to go see this pony. And I remember incredibly vividly the day that I was going to get to ride her. And I was old enough that I was going to be able to get to ride her. And that day came, and I did ride her. And that was also the first day that my dad abused me sexually. And obviously the conflict of immense love coupled with immense betrayal, that was the first time that I had been introduced to that conflict. And then that carried on for years. to where, it's just to the point where I couldn't separate, um, I couldn't separate love from betrayal.
The,
If that makes
the,
sense.
that is so well put, because I know we're going to talk about the inability you had to trust yourself, trust your feelings, trust other people. And that conflict was actually not just in the stable, but also at home, because your mom, who had suffered, I think what was at the time called a nervous breakdown,
Mhm.
was unavailable not only to give you the love that a mother should give a daughter or a child, also unable to protect you based on what had happened to her in her own abusive relationship. And so not only were you escaping to the stable to see a pony and be abused, but the same man who was betraying his responsibility as a father was also your primary caregiver. So it wasn't like he was at work.
Right on.
He was there serving you breakfast. And so this conflict you described at the stable was actually manifesting in all parts of your life. Must have been so, I mean, as you look back now, I think we'll talk about what compartmentalizing means, but for you looking back now must have just really reinforced that confusion of who do I trust? How do I trust?
I mean, you articulate that incredibly well. So thank you for getting me. How
Oh,
about let me just start with that. Thank you for getting me completely. And I'll keep going and share this a little more, which is more than what I share in when I'm speaking, is that conflict became harder because I learned really early that there were two sides to my dad. There was loving dad. Well, actually, let me even flip it. There was angry dad. So angry dad was violent with my mom, hitting words, hands, I mean, just very violent, and violent with us. An angry dad, there was no rhyme or reason for when it was going to happen. We could be at church, we could be in the neighborhood, we could be at the grocery store, we could be at the stable. There wasn't anything that showed us it was, oh, here now angry dad is coming. And I was scared to death of him, scared to death of him. The other side of my dad was loving dad. And loving dad read to me, he told me stories, he got me M&Ms at the store, he took me to the stable to be with the pony, he taught me how to take care of this pony. And it was loving dad that sexually abused me. And as a girl, I learned that I couldn't control either of them, but violent dad was so humiliating and everybody knew when he was violent and it was so scary and I never knew when it was going to begin and end. Where loving dad, there was a rhythm to it, there was an expectation, it was more known that that was going to happen and when it was going to happen, and nobody else needed to know it was happening. And so my conflict was really, which dad did I want?
wow.
And as a girl, 8 years old, 10 years old, 12 years old, 13 years old, and thinking that I actually had the power to choose that, and that I chose loving dad because that hurt less than angry dad. That's what I carried around with me for a very long time.
Yeah.
That this feeling that I had chosen the love versus the anger and versus the violence.
Yeah. And wow, so incredibly powerful, because what you're describing is actually what a blurred vision of love we can actually imprint into our minds. I mean, we talk about how all of these experiences really shape the lenses with which we see life. And so you're describing a terror set of lenses, right? This unpredictability of the anger, meaning that you're always on high alert for a reaction from the person who's supposed to be keeping us safe, right? I mean, at the end of the day, our parents' primary responsibility is to keep us safe and to unconditionally love us. You and I didn't experience either of those things. So everything that we saw in life was through this set of can't trust, unpredictable. And I'm sure school was a bit of a minefield for me. I mean, just in terms of not being able to differentiate between, oh, these adults are safe and these adults are not safe. It's like everything was kind of confusing for me, as it sounds like for you.
Mm.
And also, the fact that you developed this very blurred set of eyes to see love through. And what did love mean? I mean, to love me was to take me to the stable, but to love me was also to violate the trust that I had in you.
Totally.
And by the age of 13, it became too much for you, and you found yourself picking up some outside,
That's,
you found yourself picking up drugs and alcohol, like me, not like the other kids, but it became an immediate escape. Am I on track with this story?
no, you're totally on track. And I'll pick up what you had said about my mom, because you're right on. When I was 8, she had a nervous breakdown. And back then, people were just very heavily medicated. And so she wanted to love me, and she did love me, but she just wasn't mentally or physically capable of showing me that love. And so to your point, my dad was the primary caretaker. So that just makes your mind go boom. So yes, then fast forward, when I was 13, I started smoking pot and dropping acid. And just like what you said, it was definitely not to party. It wasn't about fitting in. For me, it was that by the time I was 13, I truly believed that I had no ability to love. I felt like my ability to love people and my ability to have anybody love me was gone. And so drugs just became an ability to fill that hole. And, same thing, escape or fill the hole. But it did the trick for a while.
And how did the compartmentalizing, and when we talk about compartmentalizing, to be clear, we're talking about really putting everything in our lives in a box that we can kind of separate as a part in and of itself, that doesn't have anything to do with, it's like we just kind of start disconnecting parts of our lives in order to survive. At least that's the way I compartmentalize. Yes. I learned we do things in pattern because we get a payoff from them. And so we started to do drugs to escape, because every time we did drugs, we could escape the reality of our lives. We started not to trust people. We started not to accept or love ourselves, and so we continued a pattern of kind of avoiding dealing. And I like to say, what we don't deal with ultimately deals with us. And I think that happened for both of us in our lives. And so, because this pattern of avoidance and escaping, and I'm sure, as you started into the drugs and alcohol, you were escaping the reality of what was happening to you. And even though it stopped, because it did stop at the age of 13, but the escape didn't stop, did it?
No, it didn't. And the escape didn't stop because the effects of it didn't stop. I was so messed up. And I shouldn't even laugh. That's a defense mechanism. I laugh when I say something that makes me feel vulnerable. In fact, right before the drugs really started, I had dabbled a little bit, but right before drugs started, the impetus of that was my mom and dad did divorce because my mom found out about my sister. And at that time, I denied that it had happened to me. And my sister was 17 or 18 when she came to my mom and said that it had happened to her. And my sister was pretty certain it was happening to me at that point because she could observe the behavior. And I denied it to protect my dad because I didn't want him to get hurt, and I didn't want anybody to know.
Of course.
And so, but we moved. So I was taken away from him. And we moved into this little neighborhood, me and my mom and my brother and my sister. And I wanted so desperately to belong somewhere. And I thought that this new place would be my home because my dad wasn't there anymore, so he wouldn't move us. And I, 12, 13 years old, and this is the place that's going to be my home, and this is where I'm going to belong. And what I found is that the only way that I knew how to belong is by using what my dad had taught me, which is boys want sex, or boys want something from girls, and I have that I can give them. And this is also, I don't share this in the speaking, you know, this is stuff that I don't typically share, but it's incredibly important to my story because I felt like the only way that I would belong or that I would feel love still is by not having any kind of physical boundaries. And I was 13 years old. And so then experiencing as a 13-year-old what a 16-year-old boy might want or what an 18-year-old boy might want. And at that point, then I just learned that, you know what, I'm really, really just nothing. You know, nobody loves me. I don't love anyone. The only worth that I have is my physicality. And that is when I said, I don't want to feel this anymore. I just don't want to feel anymore. And that's when I started really getting into drugs big time because I didn't have friends. I didn't belong. You know, I only had the sense of my worth was my physical self. And I was like, I'm out.
Yeah, this is, I mean,
I'm out.
there is so much, in that little part of the story. I'll start with identifying because, you know, when I went to Fairfield University, which is where I met our mutual friend, Craig Maloney, when I
Yeah.
drove from Maine to Fairfield, so it's about a 5.5 hour drive. And I knew two things were going to happen when my parents dropped me off. You know, one, I was staying and they were leaving and going back to Maine. And I had this overwhelming kind of sense on the way down there of literal euphoria. Like, this is all going to, I mean, I'm going to be able to recreate myself. I'm going to fit in. They're going to be gone. And wherever you go, there you are. Because like you, I guess the best way I could describe it for me was like my experience as a child installed in me a computer virus. You know, that computer virus was, you know, running through my system of not good enough, not going to fit in. I had to use, you know, my own coping skills that I learned of overinflating my ego, making up stories about who I was to try and fit in with the other kids. Cause I too had that common feeling of not belonging. Something must be wrong with me. And I'll use whatever I've learned growing up, which for me was, I learned to lie. The worst lie, you know, I learned to lie like most kids, you know, did you break that? No, so I don't get in trouble. I learned to lie about who I was. I learned to lie about what was happening to me. Like, you don't talk, don't tell, don't feel. You didn't want anyone to know what your dad was doing to you because it was a reflection on you, embarrassment and shame. That's how I felt. And so we do learn these things in pattern. And the great news for people listening, as tragic as these stories are, is there is a software program to uninstall these viruses, and it lives within each and every one of us. And as soon as we decide the things that people do to overcome and uninstall those viruses, we can install a new program called self-love, success, and fulfillment, which is what I've watched you do. But it came at a price for us. And that's what I hear with you. Wherever you go, there you are. And so we lean into what had helped us avoid, you know, and fill that empty hole, which for both of us was drugs. And it gets worse, never better. And so, you know, there you are, you know, using the things that you've learned, and the drug addiction really gets ramped up, huh?
Yeah, totally ramped up, and the lies got ramped up. You say that so well, right? You're learning how to lie. Yeah, completely ramped up. By the time I was 16, 17, I was already full out using Coke. Sometimes if I could find it, that was a pretty expensive thing. But back then it was crank and crystal meth.
Yep.
You know, right? Very hardcore, completely addictive drugs. And so by the time I was 18, 19, I mean, I had already been snorting it, smoking it, and close to shooting up. And when I was 19, 20, I was shooting up. And it was every day. I mean, I was doing this stuff. I did graduate high school, so that did happen. I graduated when I was 17. And there were times in there my senior year that I was really under control, and I would only smoke pot. So
such a good girl.
I know, right? It was like, I was like, oh, it's just pot. When I graduated high school and I moved in with some people, that's when I just went all out. And it was, for me, it was coupling this escape, or filling the hole of the loss of love I have an I must have an addictive personality, because it was like an immediate addiction. And so, it was to the point where I had a job at Fantastic Sam's. I was a receptionist, and I was going to community college, and I was responsible at Fantastic Sam's. I was the receptionist, and I would take the money each night and deposit it the next day. And, the owner of this, it was a franchise, it was just a husband and wife that owned this. Well, I started stealing money. I started stealing money out of that to pay for these drugs. And that was probably like the first thing that I did, that I knew that I was hurting somebody else for what I was doing. Because usually I just felt like, well, this is just me, and I'm only hurt, I don't even know if I really actually thought about hurting myself. But, so my behavior started manifesting itself in that way. And it was definitely where my daily life was snorting crank and crystal meth. To get high, I would smoke it. And then finally, to get high, I started shooting up. So this wasn't a party on the weekends. Right. Right. I mean, it was like, this is my state.
And that life, and, these patterns that we develop, I think, people that don't understand addiction don't understand the progressive nature of it, because I think there's two things. We're going to talk about how these shaped you as we go through this, because I think we have two dials that actually drive results in our lives: the beliefs that we have about ourselves and the world, and the behaviors we engage in. And so for you, obviously your sense of self-worth and self-esteem, but based on experiences, was affected and dialed way down. And then we engage in these kind of unhealthy, immoral, kind of shame and guilt-based behaviors. And so we're reinforcing, I don't think I'm good enough. And now I'm doing things that prove I'm not good enough, like stealing from the till at Fantastic Sam's, like lying to get what I'm, like using my body to get drugs. Now I've got track marks in my arms. And obviously that just proves the narrative that I've always had about myself, that I'm not good enough. And we perpetuate this life. And really it feeds itself. I mean, it becomes our only life. It becomes our existence. Not good enough. Of course I'm not good enough. And I'll do these things to prove I'm not good enough. And then I'm going to do more. Then I'm going to do more to cover up the shame and guilt of what I just did.
Yeah. I mean, that's right on. I'm not going to go to college. I'm not going to get married. I'm not going to be a mom. I'm not going to be in a, like, who's going to love who? And how about this? Who am I going to love? I'm not going to love you. So it was just all the way around. Absolutely. So why wouldn't I just do what I wanted, with thinking there weren't any consequences that I could conjure up of why I shouldn't be doing those things. And Charlie, I am telling, I mean, there are things that I saw and witnessed during the drug destruction days that truly make my head go, oh my God. The fact that I am here today is mind-boggling.
Well,
and we all have that story.
We do.
Who have come from that destructive world. I mean, there's one thing that I do this. So when I was, doesn't even matter how old I was, whatever, during that time, I hung out with, more like definitely troubled souls, but troubled souls in a way that I felt like I belonged, and I felt protected, and I felt safe. So these were strong, physically strong men, mostly. And one of them ended up at one point tattooing his name on my arm, like literally branding my arm with his name. And then probably 6 months after I ended up escaping from Tacoma, and we'll get into that, he shot somebody on the highway on Christmas Eve. A father-to-be with the pregnant wife in the car. Like this is the type of person that was in my world. And his name was branded on my arm. And he killed somebody and then went to prison for life. Like that is what I carried around with me. So we talk about the abuse ending at 13, but the effects of the abuse were forever, you know? And so I just threw that out at you, but that is the world that I lived in. It was dark and destructive and no way out.
Yeah, we're gonna you didn't just throw it out here. We're gonna say that was the world that you felt you belonged in. I mean, our
Yes.
choice, when we choose, when we feel, and this is really important for people to understand, that I have learned, when I have a certain belief about myself, I feel like I'm exactly where I belong, and I'm going to attract into existence the kinds of people, the kinds of experience that prove the expectations I have about how my life should be. Win, lose, or draw, good, bad, or indifferent. I mean, the great news for people is, as Trisha Kendall sits here today, inspiring young women all over the world, that when you change these dials, and we're going to talk about the power of choice, but when you change these dials and start to have a little bit of hope that you can change the belief about yourself and match that with changing some behaviors very simply. And you talk about the importance of doing simple great. And that when you do, you say it much better, but is it when you do simple great things?
Well, I say for me, it was doing the little things great.
There it is.
Doing the little things great, making good small decisions each day, chunking it down.
Yeah, and that's been, we're going to talk about your hero story, because, despite all these experiences where you felt you believed, we're getting to a point where the desperation just takes over, and you're really at a point of hopelessness. And I think you describe it best because you say your eyes weren't empty, they were vacant. And I mean, the eyes are such a pathway to the soul, and I think that's ultimately, I always tell people, it's like, no matter what test you think you can pass, it's that mirror test that ultimately is the big one for us. Can't really look at the mirror. And so let's talk about that kind of pain, the pain of desperation.
Fast forward, I was 20. I was 20 years old, living in Tacoma, Washington, and I really was completely alone. There's the only people around me were drug users and drug dealers, and it was just, it was bad.
And you were one of them.
And I was, yeah, right. Both of those things. Both of those things. And one morning, this was my life. I would stay up for days on end, where I would use, crank and crystal meth throughout the day, then shoot it up at night to get high, and then I would stay up the entire next day. So I would go on like 3 day no sleep binges. And it's important to this story because I would feel at the end of the binge, like, oh my God, I just have to sleep and I'm not going to do this again because I can't, like, you're psychotic almost. So I was at a psychotic state with no sleep and drugs and no food. It's just Pepsi and Newport cigarettes. So I would go through this cycle, but I would always, once I woke up, would open up my drawer and do more lines and keep going. This particular morning, I had been up doing my binging and all of that, and alone in the bathroom with bruises all up and down my arm, exactly what you said at the very beginning. I had just enough crystal meth left for what I say is either 2 more fixes or 1 fatal overdose. I mean, it was that. And I had no money. I had nothing to give. I had no friends. I didn't have school. But at that point in time, when I looked at myself in the mirror, that's when I saw nothing, vacancy, nothing, no love, no hope, no self-worth. I didn't even know how to verbalize self-worth. And I chose to die. That is what I wanted to do. Because what else was there for me? And go on.
I think you described perfectly the life we think we deserve should end. And if it's going to end, it might as well, I mean, anytime's fine. It's going to end anyways. And I have no hope, and I have no self-worth, and I have no value to myself or others. And so, what else would there be to do but just, to really just finish this once and for all, and end the pain.
Yeah. And let the psychotic episode go, let me sleep forever. Like, just let it go. And so, and you know this, and this is why we listen to song before we got on here. But seconds before I put the fix in my arm, I mean, like seconds, Charlie, I was there. The needle was in my arm. I had to find a place because it was so hard to find a place to shoot up. And I found it, and my phone rang. And at that point, you know, it's old-fashioned phones because there are no smartphones. But I had the little caller ID box. And the caller ID box was sitting right, if I was right in the bathroom, the caller ID box with my phone is just like right outside there, right outside of the bathroom. And I looked over at it. Actually, I didn't even look the first time. The phone rang. I just kept going. The phone rang again. I just kept going. The phone rang a third time, and I glanced down, and I knew who it was because the area code was 254, which is Killeen, Texas, which is where my big sister, Maria, lived with her husband and their 2 young children. And my story is that I picked up the phone. And you and I have talked about this, that was the first choice that I made in my journey to becoming what I consider the most successful person I've ever known. And I wouldn't be where I am today if I hadn't chosen to pick up the phone.
Because I'll use your words. I mean, if your sister called the day before, you don't answer. And if she calls the day after, you're not here.
I'm not there.
And the reason that you're seeing both Trisha and I in tears is because before this episode, I played a song for her by Matt Kennon called "The Call," and it's a song. It's a country song, of course, and it's a song of a phone call, and it's a phone call that occurs right before a man's about to commit suicide. And the caller says at the end of the verse, you know, "I hope I didn't catch you in the middle of anything, but I just wanted to call." And he picked up the phone and ultimately didn't pursue, you know, ending his own life such as you, and picking up the phone that day. The world's a better place for it. And we have, I mean, the choices we make. And it was that moment, you know, that you felt, and I love this part because you told her that, you know, she called right at the right time. And she said, sis, I've always been calling.
That's right. I mean, it's so, and it was years later, actually, when I gave my very first talk, it was for the American Association of University Women. And I gave a talk in Canton, Massachusetts. And it's the first time that I shared my story. And the whole community was there. And it was just amazing. And my sister was there. You know, she came in. She lives in Chicago. She came in for it. And so it was the night before that. And I asked, you know, I even said to her, I was like, oh my God, isn't it amazing? Isn't it amazing that you knew to call me right then? Like, and my sister is very religious. I'm not, you know, so she would say, ah. And she said to me that night before, you know, I gave my first speech the next day, she was like, oh my God. She's like, my little sister, I called you all the time. I never stopped calling you. That was just when you chose to answer. I was like, whoa. Whoa.
But our lives are truly the result of our choices. And you know this as well as anybody, that starting on that day, first of all, whatever it was you felt connection for the first time in a long time. You felt love at whatever level you could feel it at the first time. And your ears and eyes, as vacant as they were, heard something that gave you a glimmer of hope.
Yeah. And you know, when I think back to 20-year-old Trish, she wanted to answer the phone. Wow. Right. I chose to do it, but that's because I still there was that innate, because I now completely believe that we all have an innate desire to love and an innate desire to be loved. And just that second of me wanting to pick up the phone and choosing to do it. So the wanting was my innate desire to be loved. The choosing to pick it up was my deliberate action, you know, my deliberate step to take action on that. And man, that's powerful.
And I think that is, it's transformative. I mean, I think we don't give the power of choice, enough talk. And that's why we're gonna continue as we go through this as our theme, to talk about the power of choice. Because look, as I sit here, I mean, I'm looking at the wood floor, the throw carpet, the pictures of your children, the beautiful vest you're wearing, the smile that you're wearing. And I want people to know that out of the despairs of an empty bathroom and a vacant look and track marks up and down our arms and a sense of hopelessness and loss, that we can give birth to a phoenix of our own new life based on choices we make, and the empowering choices we make will result in an empowering life. And the woman on top of the mountain does not get dropped off by a helicopter. I mean, you've walked some miles, sister. You've walked some miles, and we're going to talk about those. But no matter, I mean, when we feel hopeless, we're helpless. And when we start to feel a little bit of hope, we start to feel empowered. And I want to talk about simple, because I think people today want that quick fix. They want, they want to drop the 50 pounds immediately. They want to get the dream job immediately. They want to, get that car immediately. And, I love when you talk about the life that you've led, and I want to go through, the way out of this bathroom and this hovel started with now the choice to pick up the phone, and then the acceptance of help.
Yeah. Well, at that point, my sister moved very, very quickly. So some of this is just also having the right people in the right place when I made the choice. So my sister called my stepbrother, who lived about an hour away, and she said, "Go get Trish right now." So because the phone call with me and my sister, I said, "I need you. I need my sister." She didn't know how bad. She did not know that I was on the bathroom floor with needles ready to kill myself. But she knew that I was completely at a loss, and I'm sure she knew that suicide was right around the corner. It wasn't until later that I got to where she was that I told her, how close it was. So I went quickly. I was with my sister, and then what my sister did I say she is my hero. Her and her husband, at the time he was a first lieutenant in the Army, and their two young kids, they brought me into their home in Texas. So I went from Tacoma to Texas. They brought me into their home. And the first part of my probably recovery is the fact that they had me, we entered into basically almost a contractual agreement, a two-way agreement. I had to agree to do certain things. They agreed to do certain things. I had to commit to that agreement, and they committed back. And that was the first time that I experienced somebody keeping a promise, somebody giving their word on something, and it actually being true.
I'll tell you,
my sister and David.
I think your sister and David probably kept a lot of the promises that they made to other people. I think the one person who had been living without keeping the promises they've made to, I always say the most important promise that we make is the one that we make and keep to ourselves. This sounds like the first time that you started to keep the commitment that you made to yourself and to them.
Oh, it is absolutely. It's the first time that I committed to an agreement completely.
How important is that? And your agreement, you didn't agree, to get an MBA at Harvard. You didn't agree, you agreed to go to Narcotics Anonymous,
right?
To live by a curfew, right?
That's right.
I mean,
we're talking, they seemed huge at the time. Oh yeah, like part of the agreement was having breakfast and dinner as a family. I was like, what is this? But yeah, so we're not talking about, there were fundamental little things that I agreed to on a daily basis. And man, I'm telling you, obviously at first I was like, you're crazy. So, thinking that to my sister, and then over time being with them, especially with my niece and nephew, truly I learned that the power of committing to a two-way agreement for me transformed my attitude of I have to do these things to I want to do these things. And it didn't happen overnight, but it did happen. And then all of a sudden, when I wanted to do those things, then I wanted to do more things that were like those things, and you've experienced this, and then you create a different space in your life.
You create the feeling, and the feeling, I mean, it's the behaviors that are the catalyst for all of this. But if we have a belief of not worthy, we engage in not worthy beliefs. A sliver of worthy and a sliver of behaviors can actually start a bonfire in the other direction. And that's why I love how simple those commitments were. And I love you say that although they were simple, your commitments were, I mean, they agreed to take you into their home, trust you with their kids, have, financially support you, get you to the doctor, get you, their commitments seem a lot harder than yours, but yours sound a lot harder to keep to me.
Oh, they sucked. Sucked. I was like, what are you talking about? Yeah. And I mean, that is that time in my life, I experienced what it felt like to love and what it felt like to be loved. Now, I was very, very far away from getting to where I am today, which is choosing to embrace my boundless capacity to love and my boundless capacity to be loved. And it took decades to get there. But my sister and David and Brittany and Jonathan, Brittany was 3 and Jonathan was 1.5, gave me the first shot at experiencing what giving love and what receiving love felt like. And that carried with me.
Yeah, to go from feeling no love, having no love, to just a little bit of love. I mean, now to get to where we have boundless ability to love and to be loved is amazing. But it all started with that journey, because I think, I'll just describe it the way I heard it, because one of the real experiences was that 6 a.m. wake up and tap on the head from your niece, from Brittany and John.
Ah, yes. Oh.
But there you were, no longer on a bathroom floor, but you're in a bed, you're warm, and these 2 little ones come in and they say, Auntie Trisha, will you read to us?
I mean, to this day, Charlie, I am telling you, I did not know I was going to get choked up on this. To this day, I think about that. So it ended up being like the best part of my day was early in the morning. And it's true, Brittany and Jonathan, with their little, morning breath and their little like cuteness, coming and waking me up and crawling into bed with me to watch Rugrats while they ate dried Cheerios. I mean, that is when I experienced joy in the ordinary.
Wow, joy in the ordinary. And just so you know, I'm like the Roy Firestone of podcasting. People end up crying on this podcast a lot. I just had Dave Meltzer on, who's an elite international business coach, and we talked about when he lost the house that he had bought his mom because of the way he was living his life. And we all get emotional when we see when we have a chance to latch on to hope. And and let's talk about where this built, because I love the story of your first job, because now you talk about building this kind of cachet of feelings and behaviors. And now you're going to go out and actually, there's 2 things that are transformative for me. It's this first, and I think you call it one of the most perfect jobs you could have gotten. And it wasn't by any stretch of anyone's imagination, anyone's dream job for most, but at the time it was perfect for you. You got a job selling gym memberships.
I did, for a Gold's Gym in Killeen, Texas. I did. I mean, at that point, I didn't have school. I didn't have a trade, all of that stuff. And yeah, I did. And I didn't know anything about doing this job. I didn't know what selling gym memberships were. What did I know? I had no idea. And that is when, what we were talking about earlier, where I learned that if I just chunked things down and just did the little things great, that to me, great things could happen. And for me at the time, I mean, doing something great was showing up, being at work early, asking for help, knowing each of the members by their name, knowing their kids' names. When somebody would come into the gym and I would need to show them around, truly thinking to myself, what's in it for this person, not what's in it for me. And changing that, mindset is a way that they could feel it. And so these are the things that I mean about the little things, I mean, simple, But that is the way that I was able to start to build trust in myself and then also earn the trust of others. You know, I mean, my boss, my manager, who doesn't want somebody who says, I'm here early, I want to learn. If I don't know something, I'm going to ask. And can I do more?
And so you went from totally unreliable, stealing
Yeah.
money from the till at Fantastic Sam's, to being trusted. Let's talk about trust for a second. Not only did your boss at Gold's Gym trust you with his business and the front of his business, which was selling memberships to prospective clients and knowing the ones that were there, but let's talk about where that trust really manifested, because there was a time when you were about 6 months sober that the ultimate trust was given to you by your sister and David. And I got to believe that as much as the trust that Gold's Gym put in you, that the night they decided to say, hey, we're going to go out and Brittany and Jonathan are yours. Tell me what that felt like.
That is when I knew that I had achieved my first success. And a lot of people feel like that when I became clean, that was success. And it totally was, because I needed to become clean. But I knew that I had achieved something great when my sister and David trusted me to be with Brittany and Jonathan alone. There was nothing greater than that at the time, you know? And then at one point they left for the weekend and I was with the kids. So that's when I knew that I was clean and sober.
Wow. I mean,
it was not about, months of sobriety or anything. It's when I had earned their trust. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. And you probably, I mean, now you see yourself as trustworthy. So when the people that own the Gold's Gym franchise said, we want you to go throughout the country on 90-day increments and sell gym memberships to people in various parts of the United States, you said, thank you for trusting me. I'm in. And
I'm
off you went.
and off I went. And so that started my whole career. So for 25 years, I've been in sales and business development now, and I absolutely love and am proud of the professional career that I've created. It all started with the best job in the world. You're absolutely right. It all started with that. And the company American Club System, who asked me to go and do these pre-sales every 90 days. An interesting dynamic around that is they asked me to move around. So I would move around from town to town every 90 days. That's what I was used to.
Ah, wow.
So if you add the element of, yes, absolutely, they trusted me to ask me to go. My sister and David trusted me to take me to the bus stop to go. And I trusted myself to get on the bus, because I took a bus from Killeen to Spartanburg, South Carolina. That was magnificent. When you keep peeling my onion around belonging and not belonging, and that feeling, I started to feel that I belonged within this, professional workplace because they valued me and I valued them. And moving from place to place was like, okay, no big deal. I'm in. So to me, that's also an example of taking things that you experienced growing up and making a really great decision based on that. Like, I was comfortable moving from place to place. That was okay with me. I could, at that point, I could easily strike up conversation with anyone, anywhere, no matter if I've been there for a day or if I've been there for 90 days. And I was good with that. And that comes, I truly believe that came from because I moved around so much as a little girl, so it does.
Yeah, we turn our tragedies into our triumphs. I mean, you took a lesson that you learned and saw that as a way to fuel a business development sales job that, you obviously thrived and enjoyed. But now your sister and David are, I mean, this is what I really want to dig into here, because now you made this two-way commitment, and you were under the care and under the guidance and under the kind of direction and accountability of their home. But now you've got to keep and this is where I tell people, and I want you to really emphasize, how important were the commitments that you continued to make to yourself and giving you the freedom to do that? Because now there's no curfew. There's no one tapping on your head at 6 a.m. Now you're, as I like to say, an unchaperoned, unsupervised adult out in the big world.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's a bunch of recovery commitments and sobriety commitments and work commitments that you had to continue to make to yourself, despite there was no David and Sis there to make sure you were doing it.
Yeah. And this might sound so simple. I chose to.
Yeah.
I chose to. And choosing to manifested itself in, I never went out after work. I never went to bars. I never hung out at like dance, like it completely stayed out of that environment. Completely. Didn't drink. Drinking was never my thing. I never drank, but I mean, I shouldn't say I never drank. Drugs was really my thing, but the environment of alcohol reminded me of the environment of using drugs. So just completely eliminating that altogether, completely. So I chose to stay clean and sober, but I chose through little other choices, right? It's
staying clean.
I'm not going to work at a restaurant.
Staying clean and sober was the result of the choices that you make. And I think that's oftentimes, and keeping your job and excelling at your job was the result of choices you made. Next day you decide, I'm sleeping in, taking a sick day when I'm not sick. All of a sudden you're making different choices and we don't know where the story goes. I like this story better. So we're going to stick with the real story. So
yeah. And I loved the feeling that I got. I started to feel valued and accomplished, and oh my God, I got this 90-day pre-sale to the memberships we needed to, and I was like high fives and rock and roll and you're the best, and all of those accolades, it made me feel on top of the world. And so I wanted more of it.
I don't think enough people embrace their successes. I don't think enough people really, I think we're really apt to listen to our inner critic, but that inner champion is the one whose volume I choose to turn up. And, looking at the things I do versus don't do is always a good start to that. And because you're about to tackle another really, in my opinion, the next big challenge and choice you had to make, because interpersonal relationships, friendships, being close to people, trusting yourself, was still not something that you'd embarked on. And so you get to, I guess it's Chicago, and you decide to, of all things, join a running club, and there you are now, ready to make friends and to be a friend. And I think, that's one of the things that I learned very early on, is that in order to have a friend, I needed to be a friend. And, that wasn't always a really easy thing for me, because I'd had a jaded perception of what friendship actually meant. And I want you to really talk about the running club, the girls, the things you trained for, and then, of course, that kind of grounding moment during the marathon when your girlfriend, got her stomach cramp, and what being a friend actually meant. So can you just walk us through that as we continue in your journey now to form meaningful relationships, Trish?
Yeah. And, the time that you're talking about, I was 30 years old. And I was in Chicago, and I am in the middle of an incredible professional career that I never even dreamed of. And I realized that I got along with everybody. I was friendly with everybody. I loved to hear about everybody's stories, but I was not friends with anybody. And there is a difference with that. And it was my choice that I wasn't friends with anybody. I had not taken the time to become friends, because if you back up, when I was a little girl, not even a little girl, all throughout my growing up, I had two friends. My sister, Maria, she showed and taught me love growing up. So I did have love from her, and she was my friend. And my pony. Those are my two friends. And so as a young woman, and then as an adult, the fear and feeling of not having that love drove me with the perspective of, or the deliberate intention of, it's better to not be friends than to get hurt by a friend. Or, it's better to not have it than to have it taken away.
Absolutely. Self-protection. I'm not
Yeah,
going to.
self-protection. What did I know about making friends? So I'll fast forward and make this bad that I did. I woke up and I was like, I want to be a friend. And I want a friend. And so I did. I ended up joining the Chicago Marathon group. I had never run a step in my life, but it was a healthy environment for all of us to be in. And I ended up running with a group of 5 or 6 women. And what I learned in being with them is that, maybe if I shorthand what I learned is that friendship is caring enough to listen, but it's trusting enough to share. And they were all sharing with each other. And that friendship was developing and growing. And I was not sharing anything about me. And then eventually I chose to. And I chose to share, more of me and my authentic self and what I worry about and stupid things, and meaningful things. And I learned that this vulnerability, it's like friends want you to share. They want you to trust them. That is what develops, right? That's what developed a friendship immediately, is that trust and vulnerability. And so, I got hurt before the marathon, so I wasn't able to run the whole marathon. But eventually I was better before the marathon. And so I ran it slow, but I ran it with the girls. And there was one girl in the group that ended up hurt. She had a stomach cramp halfway through. And because I knew I couldn't finish the whole marathon, I was like, well, maybe I can do it with you if I go really slow and if we do this together. And so she and I eked out mile after mile together the last part of this marathon. And the most memorable thing is, as we got to the finish line, it was me and Marcy. And as we got to the finish line, the 4 other women were there waiting for us, our friends, to cross the finish line. And that experience, and I shorthand that experience here, but that experience really taught me what it means to create community. And I had gone out thinking I wanted friends, and I did create friends, but what I ended up getting is community. And community to me is a feeling of safety and belonging. And I was like, wow, this is success. This is what I needed.
Wow. And that is so, I love the way you're blossoming, your evolution, your transformation is so foundational and built on so many principles. And to be selflessly involved in someone else's lives is one of the greatest forms of fulfillment. And what's often lost on so many is that allowing other people to be selflessly involved in our lives is also empowering for them. It's a gift that we can give them, and that's true friendship. It really is a two-way street, to have a friend and to be a friend. And watching what you've done as a mother, an inspirational speaker is, I think, underselling. I don't even know how to describe what you bring to women, professionals, and really the world through your message. And, so you had this, you used all of these choices and continued to make healthy choices that led to this healthy life. And you created this career in as a professional executive woman in sales and marketing and in the healthcare world. And then you said, well, that's something that I've done, but now let me take this other risk and see if I can use my story to guide other women in maybe the perils that they're having. And that there's 2 things I want to make sure that we hit on, because this is one of them. Is, what was that choice like, and how much of this past, and drudging this stuff up to help others? I mean, that's, to me, one of the most selfless things, is taking your pain and your story and using it as a way to help others overcome out loud whatever they're dealing with. What was that choice like for you, and how rewarding has that been, Trisha?
Immensely, more than I could say. The choice came when my daughter Lily turned 8. And when she turned 8, I started to see and observe this 8-year-old girl who knows nothing in her life except full love. And all the feelings of this 8-year-old girl started coming back head on. Because to be a mom, and to be a mom of an 8-year-old girl, I couldn't compartmentalize that little girl, that person anymore, right? This is like, I'm seeing it. And then to know that when I was 8, what was going on. And so it started, being front and center. And what I realized is that Lily she innately wants to give like every bit of love that she has to everyone, right? And she could have this much love one day, and then the next day she has this much love. Like, how does that happen? Well, because love begets love. And she wants like everybody's love. Whoever wants to love her, she's like, love me, love me, love me. And if you think you love me too much, you didn't. I want you to love me more. And that is what kids are. That is they haven't learned not to have this innate desire. Everybody has this boundless capacity to love and to be loved. And I realized that mine hadn't been destroyed, but that I had chosen through my life to not give all my love and to not receive all the love. Because I had chosen to be measured and guarded and selective because it's easier and safer that way. And even being married in a monogamous relationship with 2 children, I still felt that I had reached my fullest capacity to love and to be loved. I felt like there was a cap. And I was proud that I had given up to my cap. What I hadn't realized is you take that cap off, there is no ceiling to it if you choose. And I experienced, and we won't go through the story because of time, but you know the whole story. But I did experience a day in which my daughter Lily and her pony, Mona, that I had a choice to make, which was have Lily be with this pony that she loved so much and have me observe Lily with her and take Lily to the stable to be with her, or join Lily in this. Because Lily wanted me, her mom, to be with her at the stable inside with the hay and the muck and the smell and the whole thing to help Lily take care of this little pony Mona. And I was 45 years old. And I, at that point, chose to go into the stable with my daughter, with this little pony Mona. And to me, that was my manifestation of that was me realizing love is uncapped. And 2, realizing that I have the power to choose how much I love and how much love I receive. And that each day I make a deliberate decision to give everything that I have and receive all that others want to give me. And that fills me up even more so that I have more to give.
Wow. I can't tell you how meaningful that is. And it's not lost on me because having suffered, over 15 years of violent abuse, I know where that happened. I know what it felt like. I know the rooms it was in. I know what it smelled like. And to go back to, especially something as vivid as a horse stable. I mean, we're not talking about, a living room at a nondescript house. We're talking about a really distinct environment where you experience the most violent betrayal of a parent, and where now you had to give the most unconditional love as a parent in that same environment. And what's not lost on me is how powerful our minds are, because we can accept and reframe that experience and use it any way we choose. We really can put the image of what that means into our subconscious and enjoy it with Lily for all the unconditional love that a mother should have. and put aside the old record and the old music that played about what happened to you in that same environment. And what a courageous thing to do, and what a gift to give your daughter, and what a powerful place for you to really experience unconditional love from your daughter, and to give unconditional love to your daughter. And it must have been, I mean, at first it must have been really hard. I'm not sure I don't, did it ever not get hard?
Yes.
Oh, that's so
Yes.
great.
And it's actually mine and Lily's place.
Wow.
We both get so much enjoyment out of going to the barn together, and we smell like the barn, and we've got barn all over us. And it is our time even to reset together. It's her time to reset from the crazy day she had as an 11-year-old girl that deals with whatever 11-year-old girls deal with. And it's my time to reset from my day. And I always know now that it's a sanctuary, because the smell now for me triggers safety, love, and possibility.
Yeah, that is, when we change the way we look at things, the things we look at change. And I don't think there's a better example of that than you and Lily in a barn with her horse, and you being the mother that you've chosen to be. And it all started with, just making a decision to ask for help, to make a two-way commitment, to keep those commitments that you made from a very early age, a very early point in your recovery, to doing those same things now. And it's given you this amazing life that you share with so many. And I have to say, you are the most successful person that I've ever met. And I am so honored to call you a friend and to share this journey with you. And it would be really empowering. And we'll obviously provide a link to your website, but I'd really love for you to share what you're doing today, how you're doing it. I know you've got some amazing platforms that you're sharing with leadership teams and women, and empowering them based on what you've done. Can you maybe just give us a little overview of what it is that you are doing now and how people can find you?
Oh, you're awesome. Yeah. So trishkendall.com is the website. And so I speak to groups of women. Now, the interesting thing is it's not really all women. So my mission is to inspire young women to achieve success no matter their obstacles, redefine success, and achieve success. And then I give them a pathway that worked for me. The interesting thing is I also spend a lot of time talking to the people that influence those young women, leaders, executives, parents, community leaders, men and women, and I think about our peers, the people that we are and who we are and how we influence the younger generation, whether we know it or not. That's what we're doing. And so I spend time speaking to and holding workshops for those people that influence younger women, and then I speak to and hold workshops for those young women.
Wow. I mean, well, Trisha Kendall, what I want to do is thank you for overcoming Out Loud, for sharing your story, your passion, and your message of hope with the world. And I just hope we can make it louder and sing more so that we can continue to help others. And I'm looking forward to continuing our relationship, and getting to know each other more, and seeing how we can work together to continue to help shape the world.
Love it. Thank you for having me on. It's so good to see you.
Likewise. Thank you so much. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.